Bless us as we approach the season of Lent and enlighten our minds with a deeper understanding of you and enliven our hearts with a greater love for you. And just, Lord, as we prepare for this season, just remove any obstacles that in any way hinder our desires and our experience to draw closer to you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
You're trying to get rid of my husband?
So before I begin today, any questions or comments that we started from last week, just talking about Lent or any of the things leading up to today when we're going to talk about the temptations as they're given to us in Matthew and Luke?
Hold on.
Yeah.
I was puzzled on the comment last week. We're talking about baptism.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the reference was people are not baptized, that they will go down the road that eventually lead to sin or evil or that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I think many of us in the room have grandchildren that have not been baptized through no fault of their own. And I'm puzzled about it. If they haven't been exposed to this gift of baptism, does that lead them into trouble?
Yes. I mean, the honest answer is yes. We're connected, whether we like it or not, to original sin. There's no escaping that. There's no kind of overview apart from baptism, or just by our good desires or health or whatever it is that people will escape that. Baptism in that sense is an absolute necessity. There is no escape from the effects of original sin and the power of it apart from baptism. Does the church recognize there are moments when the grace of baptism can occur? Yes, and they talk about baptism with desire, etc. The truth is, though, the church is not optimistic in the sense that if that's not consciously sought by someone, then the graces of baptism apart from the sacrament, they don't occur. I mean, God is merciful, but God also doesn't overcome his own justice in the sense that he requires certain things, and that someone born without baptism, someone living without baptism, they don't have God. I mean, they don't know God, they don't experience God in the way that those outside do. And that's just part of the human condition. Does it mean people can't be saved apart from baptism? No. Does it mean it will be more difficult and everything? Yes. And that's just what the church understands, that that's just part of the human condition, and it does have to be overcome. In that sense, will God give people the desire and the grace to be baptized? So if they need to do it apart from their parents or their family of origin, he gives them the grace. Will he mandate it occurs? No. People have to still have some kind of understanding, experience, whatever it is that brings them to that. So, baptism, as Jesus himself says, is a necessity, because apart from that experience, however it's done, whether through the water baptism or whether it's through baptism of desire and such, we have to escape the secular idea that simply because we're human beings, God is going to make things come out for us or help us or introduce himself to us. He doesn't. I mean, in that sense, we still need to approach God in the way that he's determined, not in the way we want to determine for ourselves. So, so does that put a big responsibility on us? Yeah. And that's kind of the point, is that the church is under a huge responsibility to baptize, to draw people to faith, to experience that start of faith. So that's not a misunderstanding. That is what the church teaches. So. Other questions or comments about that? Yes. Roughly around 30, yes. It's that, well, yeah. Baptism for people, Jesus was always God. There was never a decision for him. Jesus' baptism, in that sense, doesn't do anything new for him the way baptism does for us. He was already God's Son by nature. He simply acknowledged as such, and that begins his ministry. For you and I, it's different because whether we like it or not, and whether it's politically correct or not, we're not God's children simply by virtue of being born and being human. That doesn't make us God's children, except God is our Father in that case in little case f. He's our Father, little case f. In fact, he created us. But being the creator alone does not give us any relationship to him whatsoever. And so apart from the special gift that baptism bestows of actually being in relationship with him, when we talk about being a son or a daughter of God, it's actually the deeper understanding that we've been placed in a personal relationship with the Lord, which we cannot get on our own. So that's why the church recommends that at least for families that are Catholic families, the child be baptized as soon as possible. The thing to realize is God doesn't kind of, simply because of human sin, God doesn't just go, oh, that's okay, I'm going to change things for this family or for this people, right? Oh, mom and dad don't want to baptize it, so I'm just going to reveal myself to this child. It doesn't happen that way. One of the things God does that begins in the time of Noah is after he destroys the world with the flood and he reveals himself to Noah, he promises Noah it's kind of an odd phrase. He says, from this time forward until the very end, neither rain nor sleet nor snow nor anything, none of the seasons of the earth will be changed. And what God means by that is simply this: God is not going to step in and change natural law. He's not going to come in and change the laws of nature for us. What happens, happens. And so if you get cancer or things like this out of natural law, God's not going to, generally speaking, he's not going to step in and change that. God's going to let things run its course. He's going to be alongside that experience. He's going to be in it, but he's not going to change the rules of the world or how he's governed it for the sake of human sin. So Aquinas has a very strict phrase that Bishop Brahm used to quote a lot, and it's 100% true, and it's kind of difficult, but it's this: grace overcomes nature, but nature will always have its say. In other words, we can pretend all we want that by stopping sin, by doing things that nature and what we've sort of built up for ourselves in life, or have been built up because of original sin or anything else, that we're going to escape that. We never do. God does not take death away. Right? When Jesus came, God didn't say death ends now. Now it's back to the time of Adam. He didn't do that. God said people die and they will still die. And my son himself died. And so God does not promise you will not die. In fact, he confirms it. You're going to die. What he promises is, now I'll be with you through it and with it. But I don't take it away. God doesn't take away most of our things. God doesn't undo nature for the sake of us. So even if he does in certain circumstances heal us, like Lazarus, you're still going to die. In other words, he doesn't do away with the effects of original sin in its reality. Similarly, in my personal life, if I cause effects that are going to be sin, God will not, and I need to be clear, he will not take those away. What he will do is he will endure them with you, but he doesn't say, oh, now it's a free pass. Like magically I'm going to get rid of this stuff. God never works in that way. And so original sin, why the church feels it's so important, isn't because they don't think you can be saved apart from baptism, a baptism that takes care of original sin, but it's more so the fact that apart from that grace, it becomes very, very difficult for the person to respond as time goes on to God's grace. So because now they're left to their own devices, now the family's not doing it, whatever the specific occurrences is. Remember this, God's love never rejects his mercy never rejects his justice. Justice must remain there because that's who God is. He never undoes his own plan. He doesn't look at the human race and go, oh, you know, this is too bad. This person had this kind of upbringing. Therefore, I'm going to step in differently and say everything's different for them. God doesn't do that. We might want him to. We might hope he does. That's not what he does. And when we don't like that, we say it's unfair. God simply responds as he does in the Bible time and time again. He says, unfair? Are you kidding me? You're all in this together. You made the mess together, and I save you together. So if you think you're getting a pass for your own version of salvation, whether it's the selfish Western view of I'll just believe what I want, and as long as I love God, I'm good enough, and I'm a good person, whatever that means, God says, that doesn't work. Or whether it's through other circumstances that I think I'm going to determine my own view of salvation, God says, I don't accept that. I still hold to who I am. God doesn't change who he is because of who we are. He's given us the way, he's given us the truth, he's given us the acceptance, and it's up to the human race to obey it or not, and accept it or not. And if we don't, then if there's a reason why the person doesn't, God takes it into account, but he doesn't simply override everything he's put into place for salvation and creation simply because of one person. He won't do that. As Bonaventure said once, the human race is special. The human race is special, but the human race in its entirety is greater than any one of us. In other words, I don't change everything I am in creation because you have a problem and because it's difficult for you to want to do this. Yes, Kathy. Right. Well, the first one is, the first one is Sodom and Gomorrah. God bargains with God, or Abraham bargains with God down to if he finds 10 people. Did he find 10? No. And so what did he do? So he destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So they fell. He saved Lot, who believed in him. We can have, to an extent, our faith, our prayers can help other people be saved, but we cannot ourselves save other people ultimately. So we can have them have blessings that come through us, but the blessings themselves aren't salvation in the sense that the person, for example, in Jesus' time, when the 3 men break open the roof to bring the paralyzed man down, all 3 of the versions say when Jesus saw their faith. So the plural indicates he's looking at the faith of the people who broke the wall, not the paralyzed man. He saves the paralyzed man in the sense of he heals his physical illness. But does he save the paralyzed man? No. Not ultimately, the church would say, because the paralyzed man is given this great gift because of the faith of others. So he's healed physically. Now, does that mean Jesus just forgoes anything else? No. For that person to be saved, he's given the physical blessing, he's given the blessings in this world. Does that mean that we can save other people by our prayers? Not really. What we can ask for is that God will continue to respond in people's lives, but because of the gift of free will and blessing and such, that person ultimately must still make the decision themselves of whether I've received this gift, now what do I want to do with it? I've got the physical gift of freedom. Now, how do I accept the ultimate gift of freedom? And that's why Paul will say, work out your own salvation with your own salvation, with fear and trembling. In other words, I can bring people to the water. I can bring them to all, I can give them all the gifts they need through my prayers, through my responses, through my faith. God will help through me. I become a vehicle that God's grace will work. But I never can determine another human being's faith. I can determine the gifts they receive here on earth, but which will end with this physical death. I can't determine, and I can't produce more than that for myself. It's always going to be this relationship. Now, having said that, the other thing to remember is none of us know. And in that sense, it's fine to be optimistic. It's fine to be hopeful that the mercy of God endures, because in a sense, the mercy of God does endure. It is more powerful, obviously, than sin or rejection or any of these things. But still, we also need to be honest. God doesn't save people apart from their desire to be saved. And as Christians, it might be hard for us, but we need to recognize there are people in our lives, family members, friends, who despite everything that's offered, they don't really want to be saved because they don't understand, they don't care, they're not, they don't desire salvation because for whatever reason that's not part of their radar. They don't care. And is that difficult? Yeah, we pray for people. We pray that the hope that something will come to them in the end or near the end or by the end. And that's all fine. Is not only fine, as Christians, we're obligated to actually do that, to pray for the salvation of the world. But we do that knowing that God doesn't overcome human freedom to do that. He's not going to ever force someone against their will to be saved. And so, yeah, Sodom and Gomorrah is a great example, actually, because God bargains, or Abraham bargains God down from 100 to 50 to 40 to 30 to 10. Then God says, sure, find 10, Sodom saved. Did he find 10? No, 10 were not found. Now, we come to Jesus in the New Testament, and Jesus offers himself on behalf of all. And that's why, as Christians, that Jesus gives himself for the life of the world, so that every human being is given this opportunity, past, present, and future. Does the church therefore think that because Jesus did it, people are automatically saved? No. That's why in the Mass we say, for many, not for all. Remember, it used to say for all, for the forgiveness of sins. The church said, oh, that's not accurate. For many. Died for all, will all accept it? No. So he dies ultimately for the many, the ones who choose to accept what he's done. For those who don't choose to accept it, they're not part of the many. So the mystery of salvation is something that goes beyond any of our individual understanding, though. And so for that sense, it to a sense it becomes academic, because none of us know what God will do, what God does do, and none of us know in the church what God does to those outside the church. The church itself is very clear that God has told the church this is the way to salvation, period. So the church does not have the right, and in fact it falls short of its mission if the church does not evangelize, if the church doesn't say you must be baptized, if the church doesn't go the route of the sacrament. But the church recognizes that God, who created the sacraments, is greater than his own sacraments. But how God saves outside the church, which they know he does, but the mechanism by which he does it, the church says, we don't know. And we can't claim one way or the other. We can't claim he does this or he does that, because anything we say at that point is a lie, because God has not revealed it. And despite the fact that a lot of people think, that the church kind of makes things up whenever it wants to kind of allude to doctrine, it doesn't. The church is very clear. If it's not clearly found in Scripture or the teachings of the fathers, it is not what the Catholic Church can teach. Right? That's even questions that we'd like the answer to, the church can't answer. What happens to unbaptized babies? What is the church's answer? We don't know. No, the real answer is we have no idea. We have no idea. We think because of the mercy of God, this is what happens, and we have reason for believing this and salvation. And even people who are children who are baptized, if they die as infants, the faith of the church has carried them forward to meet the grace of baptism and things like that. But the church in the end says, we have no idea. We really can't tell people one way or the other because God has not told us. And so there's a lot of things that God has not seen fit to tell the church. So the church's mission is, you do what I tell you. You go out, you baptize, you proclaim this to the nations. But for those who don't accept, what does God do? He's merciful. We know that. Beyond that, how? No idea. And anyone who claims one way or the other is a liar. They are. Oh, everybody's saved because no, that's not true. Aquinas said a long time ago, he said, well, that doesn't make sense, because then it would mean it would be better to not be a Christian than a Christian if you're saved by ignorance, right? Like, oh, I didn't know, my parents didn't baptize me, oh, I didn't have a chance. Well, that's kind of stupid, because then God's saying, well, it doesn't really matter what I did, because you don't know a little bit, so therefore you should be saved and get all the benefits and everything else. On the other hand, the real distinction of God wanting every man and person to be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth, how does that occur? We don't know. We simply don't know. So that's why for us, it's incumbent upon us to see that people are baptized and see our people are brought to the faith. Not that God can't and doesn't save people outside that way, but if he does, we have no idea how. And if he does, it will always be a much harder route for that person than those inside. In other words, the person saved outside the church, it's not like they just wake up and God's like, oh, it's all right. They didn't know, they grew up in a Buddhist family. No, it's that person will go through suffering and experience in their life to bring them to the place of faith, whether they ever consciously say it in this life or not, that is 10 times that of the Christian who already knows. In other words, they have to struggle for everything they get, because the grace is always secretive, as opposed to the Christian who knows what's coming. So to put it in level terms, it is always, you are guaranteed to be saved by faith through the sacraments of the church. You are not guaranteed any other way, and it's going to cost a lot to endure that. You can be saved, you probably will be saved, but the road to that salvation is going to be a lot more difficult than those who know. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yes. Right. Right. Exactly. Yes. And what you have makes a difference when you're dead. Mary will always be greater than any of us in heaven. Catholic heaven is not Protestant heaven. We die, the great equalizer. That's not true. The Catholic Church, as Jesus says, there are many mansions. In other words, there are different degrees of heaven. I will never equal Mary's experience of God, even in heaven. Does that mean I won't be perfectly happy for myself? No, I will be. And I'm not going to be jealous. That's the point of heaven. I'm not going to be like, look at Mary, she's way up there. Like, where am I? Like in the back seats or something. Because heaven is constant growth without sin. So someday I will be where Mary is now. The point, though, is where I reach where Mary is now, where's Mary going to be? That much further. In other words, I will never be her equal in heaven, but I will be saved. And that's the idea, is that people will be saved, but those of us who know are still obligated to strive for the holiness we have, because by how we love God, how much we love God, etc., is where I begin the afterlife. So a person on their deathbed, they can be saved. In fact, and I agree with you 100%, I think many are, and I do as a Franciscan, I think a lot of people are given that last opportunity, even if it's literally in the experience of death itself, to get that choice. Does that mean they start where I do? Not anywhere close. No. So there is still something to be said for the point of our faith, of growing in faith, of knowing what the faith does, of already being in relationship with God. That's why, why do I get my children baptized? Because I want to impart to them a gift now. And even if they don't accept or like the gift, it's always there. For them, they're one reconciliation away from getting it all back in a second. The person who's unbaptized is not there. And so can they be saved, etc.? Yes, everything else. But their route is a lot different than the one I have for a child or etc. that I want to. It's funny, I didn't think you guys have so many questions about baptism. But there was another hand that came up as we were talking. Yeah, Kathy. Mm-hmm. That's right. Yes. The Jews are the people of God because of their faith. Humanity are not the people of God. In other words, Judaism is set apart because of its special relationship, as its call, as its purpose of who it is to bring the real God to the world. Now, having said that, though, does the church say that Jews don't need to become Christian? No. In fact, you may remember about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, the United States bishops put out a document that said that. And that document lasted 48 hours because the Vatican said, no. That document needs to be pulled immediately. Because it would imply, the way that the United States bishops wrote it, it would imply that we don't need to evangelize Jewish people because they already know God. The point is, they actually don't, right? In other words, they know God to a point, but once they reject the Messiah and the Trinity that he reveals and everything, they don't. So God is still true to his promises to Judaism in a unique way, so that in that case, we're looking kind of, you've almost got three situations the church proposes in Lumen Gentium. You've got the world, you've got Christianity, and then you've got the Jews, who kind of occupy this unique place because of their history. It says they have the same God. It doesn't say they're saved. Yeah, same God. Which is interesting in nowadays because of the issues. But that is one thing the church teaches. That Islam, despite all the different variations we have of people commenting on Islam, what the church says, as the Church of Christ, who should know better, is that the God they believe in is the real God, whether we like that or not. And that's true. And then the church, that's absolutely true. The God that is revealed to Muhammad is the Trinity. He may not have understood it as such, he may not have passed it on as such, but the God who is encountered, just like Israel before it recognizes the Trinity, who knew him for generations, it's the Trinity. So when you hear people say Muslims believe in a different God, as far as the Catholic Church is concerned, that's a lie. No, they believe in the same God. Doesn't mean we all agree on it, the infinite God, but that's the real God. They're not pagans in that sense, like Buddhists, Hindus, etc., who don't accept the real God, have their own understanding. For Islam, we have a whole different situation of flowing from a real revelation of the real God of the world. So, yeah, that's absolutely true. And that's a good one to remind ourselves as Christians in this day and age when things are so difficult.
That we are not proselytizing. We are to evangelize, but we are not proselytizing.
Right. And how would you define the two differently? Yeah, it's a difficult line. We must proclaim the gospel. We teach that it didn't say that about, it didn't actually say that though. I don't know who your teacher was, sorry, but it doesn't say we don't proselytize Jews or Muslims. We have one line. Yeah, we don't proselytize. Proselytize being we don't bring the faith forward as force or in ways other than evangelization is proclaiming the gospel and letting the chips fall where they will, so to speak. In other words, it's a complete respect of the human freedom to accept or reject. Proselytization is a force of some kind. Let me give you a good example. Till recent times, there were certain countries that the United States churches dealt with on a social justice level that were called the milk carton churches. Why were they called that? Because for these Protestant churches going into South America, Africa, etc., teaching the gospel, in order to get the needed supplies that they had access to, milk and such, the people had to become Christian. In other words, it wasn't like Mother Teresa, I go out and I serve everybody, and if you choose to become Catholic because you see what we're doing, great, but I'm not going to not feed you if you don't. In other words, Christianity, the acceptance of Christianity became the issue upon which you accepted or rejected and which you got aid of some sort. The church says that's proselytization, right? Where there's a carrot or a stick by which you're accepting for a reason outside or beyond just the human condition of this is what I truly believe is true. Yes, Mother Teresa never. That was one of her things. Yes. Yeah. The people, I ask people sometimes, I go, do you guys know when Father Gosling comes in a couple of weeks, how much to this day is the Sisters of Charity, the Sisters of Charity, Missionaries of Charity annual budget? Does anyone know how much that is? Zero. They make no budget. In other words, everything is left up to God. Everything. And if God doesn't provide, then it's not meant to be. And so talk about faith and trust and etc. That's faith and trust. If God likes what we're doing and we're doing the right thing in this particular vocation, then the money will come forward. And when it comes, then we'll disperse it as necessary. But we don't plan ahead in the sense that we don't ask for donations ahead of time. We don't look at it all. We don't put together a big budget, right? There's no one in Mother Teresa's organization who's sitting at the desk crunching numbers. No one, right? And in that, she's even different than most of the religious orders, even the Franciscans who claim poverty. Oh, we got people who crunch numbers. We still do, right? So the reality is that, she's a modern day, literally a living example of what that means, that trust, that deep thing in God. Mm-hmm.
When we evangelize, we say what God puts on our hearts and minds, and we add Him.
Right.
Proselytizing, we think it's our job to make the this person, like, we know God's plan.
Yeah.
And
we force people into a mold. Yeah. And that's what I meant kind of by I let the chips fall where they may. For, like every October, early in his pontificate, I want to say by 81 or 82, then Pope, now St. John Paul II, began the year of the prayer week of peace in Assisi during the week of St. Francis. Now, that went uncommented on for years, and then suddenly 9/11 happened, and then the Western world, specifically the Americans, were like, you can't have Muslims come to the Day of Peace, etc. Well, and John Paul II, to his credit, didn't even respond with an answer, like, really? So, but what was John Paul II doing? He was recognizing that even in other faiths and other religions, etc., there is the search for God. Yes, as Christians, we're not searching in the sense that we wonder, what is God like? What is the... Nevertheless, we don't understand God. We surrender to what's been revealed. And so knowing that, when we look at other faiths and where they are searching and looking, and even people of agnostic, and atheistic even to some extent thing, of struggling through the world and what it means to be human and everything else, John Paul II, his basic response was, as the Church of Christ, we are put in the position to be Christ in this world. Therefore, we bring people to the place of prayer together. We bring them to the place of communion. Does it mean that everyone is the Dalai Lama going to become Catholic anytime soon? Probably not, right? But that's irrelevant, because the church has done what it's meant to do in order to bring the kingdom of God closer, by being there and praying with people, whether they share our faith or not, by serving people, whether they share our faith or not, all those things. So our job as Christians is not that we will save anyone, like I talked about with baptism. We don't save anyone, none of us. At best, through circumstance and our own effort and surrender, at times God can use some of us for a vehicle of his mercy, his love, more powerfully than he can those of us who aren't quite as open to being that conduit. But it's always God. Yeah, and I agree with you. Proselytism, it's not our place to criticize other faiths beyond a certain degree, because we don't know where they're coming from, etc., things like that. But when we look at like evangelicals, I think you can get an idea. It comes from a good place, right? They want everyone to be Christian. We need to remember that when our relatives are bugging us about why you're still Catholic and blah, 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 and my church is alive, we do that, You have to realize, just behind the rhetoric, they're really coming from a good place. That place being, they want you to know Jesus, to love Jesus, and to be saved. So we have to recognize the motivation is a good one. What the Catholic Church would say is it's the manner and the method that's the problem, because they use fear and a host of other things that the church would say aren't really legitimate ways to get people to accept the faith. Let me give you a perfect example. My dad, this was years ago, I grew up in Escondido, so my dad's at the old Palomar Hospital one day. That's a whole other story. It's great. He goes in for one thing. He ends up getting like some horrible disease because of the kitchen workers who weren't washing their hands. So he goes in for one thing and he stays for like 2 weeks later because he's got like all kinds. Anyway, now at that time, like if you're ill or you know someone who's ill, you go to the chaplain of the hospital and they've got the list. These are the Catholic people who have said anything, that they're Catholic. Here's your list. You can go. I mean, some of you may know you take communion to homebound or sick. And you go only to those people, do your thing. Now, what a church in Escondido called Emmanuel Faith was doing is they'd get the whole list. And they went to my father, and I presume everybody else, who was not evangelical, but already Christian. These are already Christian people. And I have a pamphlet to this day. It's in my office because I always keep it to like remember this. And they basically tried to scare the hell out of people to become evangelical. When your baptism as a baby did not count, you know, and it says these kind of things. Unless you personally accept it, it's their total theology of how salvation occurs. Now, obviously, to give them the benefit of the doubt, that person is under, from their point of view, they're being honest, right? They walk in, they say Catholicism is doing it wrong, and therefore we want to make sure you are saved. But to do it through fear or intimidation, or like I said, the milk carton babies, in other words, to withhold something that you can't have unless you become Catholic or Christian, those are not legitimate ways, the church would say, of the respect of people's freedom to determine what the church would say is the greatest choice in one's life. Do I believe in God? And having said that, yes or no, if yes, who is the God I hold as true? That, the church says, is the deepest core of what it means to be human. And so even if the choice is wrong objectively, the church says we must respect that. And we must give that the respect it deserves. It doesn't mean we don't stop evangelizing, but we don't say, you must be Catholic or you're going to hell, or you must be this or whatever it is. The church says, no, we continue to just offer Jesus. And so that's what evangelization is. Evangelization is telling the story of Jesus, connecting it to people's lives, and then hoping and praying and living ourselves that message of love and peace, everything else that we're telling them that Jesus is and we represent as his followers. We hope that they will in their hearts respond to grace, because it is great. But we cannot force that. And if things don't occur the way we want, we can't manipulate it. So that would be my sort of thing between proselytization and evangelization, which the church has. I mean, if a church is stealing from another church and both are Christian, that's proselytization, right? Because it's sort of the idea that we're just looking at numbers. I don't want to just be right. I want to be right as proven by I have like 100 people more than you do, you know. And that's one of the problems, even more so than other faiths. When the church goes into other faiths, one of the problems we've discovered in this century is what's called sheep stealing. It's a church goes into a community where that particular branch of Christianity has never existed, but there might be one already there. And yet we try to pull people not out of paganism, but away from this church into this church, right? Russia, I don't know if you remember when the wall came down, all of a sudden evangelicals flooded Russia. And in the 90s, they made a rule. I don't know if you know this. They made a law. You can't evangelize. Come in and do your stuff. What you can do is you can have your churches and have open meetings for people to come to. You may not like walk and do public things. And the reason is the Orthodox Church turned to the government and said, are you kidding? We've been here for hundreds of years. We're the ones who suffered under communism for being Christian, not these Westerners. And now they're going to come in with sort of their modern day pop, version of Christianity. No way. No way. Right? We're Christian. We've literally bled for it. So don't let them come in and take it. If people want to become that, that's fine. But don't allow them this access they have to the whole country saying, we can do this. And they didn't. The government of Russia, actually. It's funny. Modern day Russia, I don't know if you know, their current law under the political law, under their constitution and such, under the current government, going back about 30 years now. Do you know blasphemy is a law of the state? In other words, if I'm in Russia, I may not, even if I'm an atheist, I may not mock openly the church, any church. It's a federal law. Yeah, I mean, it's better than the United States in the sense of like how what the freedom it really gives to religion to some extent, that no, you may not do that, not publicly. So, Russia's kind of in this, pray for Russia. They're in this very interesting state in the world that they have, China, we've just had the bishop come back and say, if you want to see social justice, look to China, not the West, as far as how it's done. So there's, that one's a little bit different because, we have one bishop's opinion and lots of things back and forth. But, China's reached a point too, and that's why it's a place of prayer. I'll give you a personal story that's not mine, but that I know, my family. My dad's cousin, first cousin, Robert Niemitz. So he's 89 years old, 90 years old now. He, real dutiful, good Catholic son, my great uncle. His mom, dad said, "You're going to be a doctor." He said, "I don't really want to be a doctor," but he's a doctor, right? So he goes to medical school, gets great grades. He's at Johns Hopkins. He does astounding. He's like the valedictorian, everything. He's in his very first year of actual being a doctor after his residency and everything. And his dad passes away. His dad, my great uncle. 2 months, almost to the day, Bob says, my Uncle Bob goes, "Man, I'm not going to be a doctor." Right? Dad's dead now. He's taken all this time of his life. The doctor, this is in 1940 something. So he leaves medical school. Brilliant man, degrees. He doesn't know what to do. So he's picked up by Army, that time Army intelligence. Goes through schooling, decides, the guy he's working with goes, "Well, nobody knows Asian languages in the United States. Why don't you take Asian languages?" So he goes, "All right." So he takes like Chinese, Japanese, and he spends several years learning those languages, right? Well, then, lo and behold, wow, we have Korean War, the Vietnam War, etc. He's placed because of his background experience. He's one of the highest CIA operatives at that time. Asian operations. He's placed in China as the vice president of China, Pfizer Pharmaceuticals. Talk about a great gig. He gets all that money, right? Because you have to, but then he gets his other money as well. He was the one I wanted to be a spy after I was graduating law school and everything. He sat me down one day. He goes, "If you want to be a spy," he goes, "join the FBI. They're the real spies." He goes, "We don't do that." He goes, "If you've seen movies, that's all BS." He goes, "We basically look for indigenous people, natives, and we co-opt them to help us. We're not the spies. We use the spies." He goes, "I'm a number cruncher," right? He goes, "If you want to do that kind of cool stuff, join the FBI." Right, Larry? So they're the ones who actually do stuff. Like, so I remember that talk. I was like 22 years old. He's like, "Yeah, you don't want to be CIA. It's ridiculous." But I don't remember why the hell I was telling you. Sorry, what was it? Yeah, no, I know the story, but why was I telling him this story? What was my last thing before I went into this story? Russia. Okay, that's right. So that's why at this time, now we're talking back in the early 50s. China has just begun to assert its power. Remember the whole thing with crossing the border, and MacArthur wanted to drop the nuclear bomb on China. Remember you may, or at least from history, you kind of have that, what's going on. The CIA at that time was already long-range projecting, and one of the things they saw was the enforced abortion rules and things like that, and the Chinese culture that it's going to be a male. If you're going to have, if the Communist Party says you can only have one child, if you want to continue to remain part of the party and get the benefits of being part of the party, it's not illegal. Sometimes people say it incorrectly. It's not illegal to have more than one child in China, but if you have more than one, you may not be a member of the party, and that has real ramifications in society. It's like, I mean, they don't have the right to vote or anything, but basically it cuts any of your political clout. Anything you might have is gone. So they already saw that. So they were already, like, his job was to create scenarios of where is China going to invade one day to get women, right? Honestly, and that's where they are now. China is at a crossroads. You have in China a huge grassroots movement, not just Christian, but many Christians, of people who are wanting China to change. They don't want the communist government. They want some kind of democracy. They want some kind of more free trade and an open economic system. But China's reached a real crossroads. There are the latest statistics that we can kind of gather. There are 5. Now I want you to think about this: 5 men for every 1 woman. Okay, so 4 of those men will not have wives or be married in their life. And without making sort of without being too over dramatic about how marriage domesticates men, but even our government, right, 50 years ago was planning this. They know that China has a problem because it has to do something to keep its internal affairs in order. And if you have that many single men, your crime rate, all kinds of things begin to skyrocket. You just have societal problem. And so China's kind of reached that point. They're literally have tipped the scale. The number of men and the number of women is so dramatically different that you have hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions. I don't even know. China has such an enormous population of over 1 billion. We have all these single men that they need an outlet. And as weird as it sounds to us, is like, well, if it's not marriage, there's always war, right? Mm-hmm. That goes back even further than China, right? Aristotle said it's funny when people hear this because they're like, Aristotle? I thought the Greeks were intelligent. Yeah, me too. But Aristotle said this famous quote: the natural state of humanity is war. Natural state of humanity is war. In other words, that's what human beings do. We fight and we kill each other and we overpower one another. So, it's kind of been brought to light with this bishop who just went to China just in the last few weeks, his statements. And so we do see, China's poised for something. It really is. It's the largest nation in the world, its resources, everything else. It's poised that it could continue its communistic path and really do things. But it's also maybe for the first time in any of our living history since it became communist, it may be the first time in its history that maybe, you think of Tiananmen Square, those of us who remember that a little bit, and that was like so short-lived. It was like a week long, freedom, nope. But they're really poised for something. China needs prayers, because could you imagine if that place became open to democracy, to freedom, to faith? Because the Chinese, who are people of faith now, they live a faith that they suffer for. Benedict, last Pope, wrote a letter. You can look it up online. It's a beautiful letter. But he really gives the Chinese government, he really goes toe-to-toe with them, because if any of you have been to China, there are actually Catholic churches everywhere. What most people don't realize is those are state-run Catholic churches. The priests and the bishops are appointed by the state, not the Vatican. And that's what Benedict wrote his letter on, telling the Chinese government, its people and the Catholics there, no, these people aren't bishops, right? If the church chooses the bishop, they're a bishop. If your government tells you who's the bishop, that's not a bishop, no matter what. And so up until very recently, there's kind of been this tension added to it. And I forget which bishop it was that went there just recently and came back with his glowing praise and everything. We kind of have to wonder. I mean, let's be honest. Like, as much as we want to be open, you wonder, right? Well, did China just put on a good face for the 2 weeks the bishop is there, right? Anyone can make it look good, So I wanted to buy this shirt one time, which I would never buy because I wouldn't be allowed to wear it. But it was a great shirt. It said, "Jesus is coming," and then it says, "Act busy." right? I mean, like, is that China what's doing? Oh, the West is coming to check it out. Let's all pretend like everything's like going fine. I mean, yeah, Cardinal Newman. And a lot of people have, like I said, that church has really suffered. After Vatican II, I had the privilege of meeting the man who is the papal nuncio, that's the Pope's personal representative to China. Each region or country, depending on their size, has a nuncio. So ours is in Washington, D.C. So when bishops are chosen and everything else, it's the nuncio who takes the United States' choices and he whittles them down to 3 or 10. And then he gives those to the Pope, and then the Pope whittles it down to 3. And anyway, so they have a lot of authority. Well, he was telling a story to what was then the Mission Young Adults. When I was a younger person, we used to meet at the Mission right by the then Jack Murphy Stadium, so you know how old I am. But Qualcomm, and he came and he spoke one day, and it was really interesting. He told the story. He said after Vatican II, it was about 6 months later when his next trip was, and he went to China, and he gathered all the leaders together. It was all, you always had to go over as someone else. So I don't know if you remember, because for years, until just the last couple of years, I had one of my old teachers, Father Haas, the Franciscan, and he was a missionary in China recently, comparatively so, and nothing's changed. He couldn't be a priest. He worked as an accountant. And then at night, he would gather with the real Catholics and baptize, teach, preach, etc. Well, this cardinal, retired cardinal, said when he first told them all the changes in Vatican II, they thought he was a spy. Because they're like, what do you mean the church doesn't want us to fast anymore? Right? You're telling us to give up all the things that sustain us, because unlike the West, we're literally dying for our faith. So if you were a Chinese Catholic now, you're still fasting like they did prior to Vatican II, with all the, Quadragesima days and all those weird feast days we used to have in the old calendar, and Fridays of every Friday of the year is a day of abstinence, not just Lent. That's what they do to this day, because it's part of their identity. It's what sustains them. In the face of a government, the entire government is opposed to who they are and what they are. So, okay. So we've been on baptism for, till our break, an hour. So let's take our break. Maybe after we come back, we can get to the temptations. Maybe not. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. But let's go ahead and take our break right now. That doesn't mean your application is what you want.
I think I did it. Nope.
So yeah, the discussion of Islam seems to say God, the churches is making common ground for us to speak about. It's not claiming that by therefore we accept Islam, which teaches. Yeah.
No, I don't want to. That's normally. Stop.
Okay. Right, yeah. knows how to do it. I have no idea. I don't know how to get to the website. I don't know any of that. Oh, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I told Quinn the one on Franciscan spirituality we can't film just because of rules. This one I don't know what. I didn't mean it to be that way. It's about an hour on starting with questions on baptism. It's so funny that different classes Monday, not a single question. Like they went right on, and we're like, by this time we're like halfway done. But yeah, that's fine. That's what people want to talk about. I agree with that. I don't disagree that, and I don't think that God doesn't intervene, but even his interventions aren't salvation. We pray for people. I mean, people can be saved from cancer, they may still end up their lives being right. Right. That's why, yeah, I agree with that. I mean, that's like all miracles, even Jesus during Jesus' lifetime. You can be the miracle just in its little physical thing of God over his nature, or you can look at them as his frustration causing people as a deeper sign, a deeper signification of who he is and what God is about. Right. It's he. Yeah, right. Oh yeah, I do too. I believe it. Yeah, don't misunderstand. That's like, yeah. No, I definitely believe that too. I don't think you can legitimately call yourself Christian if you didn't think God doesn't and can't intervene in nature. Of course, nature to him is just like, if I write a paper and I correct it, I'm like, right, exactly, it's mine. I do that as I want. It's his creation.
I see you got your stuff at
and that's one of the things, people ask about prayer. Well, there's